Okay, we are going to be working on our exercises tonight in Unit 7. And this is Chapter 33 in our textbook. You'll notice here that some of my videos point to Chapter 31. So in the previous edition of the book, um, this was Chapter 31. It was actually a printed chapter in the book, and then they do the next edition and they change it. So if you have 10th edition, it's Chapter 31. If you have 11th, it's Chapter 33. Otherwise, functionally, the chapters are identical. So just don't confuse those numbers there. The other thing I'm going to point out is as we work on our first exercise set here, there is a provided file that you will want to download right here called loan.java that contains all the calculations that we need to write our application. So we're not going to worry about writing those pieces. The math part's already done, and we're just utilizing it in our program. And this is a type of file that creates a blueprint. And so if you look at it in terms of the structure of the file, I'm going to bring it up on screen here in my Notepad++. You will notice that this is a class file that's designed to create loan objects. And so there's some advanced features added to this, and I really don't want to dig into that too heavily. The one is that we are implementing a superclass called Java Io Serializable, and that's a mouthful. But let's talk about what that concept means first. To serialize data means to take the information one character at a time and transmit it in a stream. So if you could think of taking all the information that you hold and then putting it in a single file line, and all of it has to transmit along that path. That's exactly what we need to do when we transmit information over a network. It goes as a series of characters, single file and line. And so we have to implement this class to allow the information from this class file to be able to transmit over a network from program to program. Otherwise, it won't work. And so that's usually the first question I get there. Why are we doing that? Because it allows the data basically to be transmitted in a serial fashion, or one bit or character after another. The other thing is this is a blueprint file, so we're going to use this to instantiate a loan object that will have these features: annual interest rate, number of years of the loan amount, and then a timestamp that comes from the system. There's a constructor file that presets things to an annual interest rate of 2.5, a 1-year loan period, and a loan amount of $1,000. That's automatic if you instantiate. You can override all of those amounts, of course, with getters and setters down here below. The other piece that's in this file is the overload constructor. So you're going to see a secondary one here where you can actually send in all the amounts in advance and pre-populate them. So if I'm going to instantiate a loan object, I can say, well, my interest rate's 3.79, it's a 30-year loan, and it's for $200,000, for example, which would be pretty typical for a home. And then finally, if you scroll down here, you'll see a couple of calculation methods below the getters and the setters. Each of these are named with a get because they basically return information to us. But we will be calling these methods through the object that we create in order to do the calculations of the monthly payments and then the total payments. Very simply because we don't need to recreate this in the program and go through the whole process about talking about it. Here it is pre-created and it works, and we're just utilizing it. And this is often what programmers do. All you really need to know as the programmer are, how do you create this thing? What are the constructors? There's one, generic constructor that just operates if you send no arguments, and another one that accepts all the arguments, getters and setters for everything, and then two methods that do the work. And that's all you need to know, right? And so that file has to be downloaded and added to whatever folder that you're working on with the code files for the other exercises. Now, the first piece of what we're going to do is we are going to create this exercise 33.1, and if I remember right, I have it open here on my screen, and let's just kind of look at what we're creating because this will help us get a vision. And we're going to create this program called Loan Server. So exercise 33.1. It says, write a server for a client. The client sends loan information, annual interest rate, number of years, and loan amount to the server. The server computes the monthly payment and total payment and sends them back to the client, and name the exercises as shown. So you're going to create two GUI programs, one that's going to have some fields and a button and then a big text area, and the other one that's just a big text area. And really the way the server is going to operate is it's just going to be a console where we see all the interactions happening. So we'll see it receiving data and then sending the data back. And then that data will be basically sent from this form. When you hit the submit button, it will send over to this program, which will process it all. It'll show up on the screen here and then send the data back for display in the client. And we're going to be doing this on our own machine. So both programs will have to be built separately, and then both will need to be triggered to run at the same time. So they have to both be operational. Server gets turned on first. Once they're both operational, we will type stuff into the form, hit the button, and that whole process will work. And if we do it all correctly, we will see that on the screen. So let's get started, because this is a little bit of work to get it going here. So over to Eclipse, and let's go ahead and begin by creating a new Java project. This one I'm going to call Chapter 33 for the name of the chapter. All right, and now inside of the Chapter 33 project in the source file, let's create a new class file. And let's begin by calling this one, well, let's start actually by building the client, because that's got more interface components. I'd kind of like to get that out of the way, and then we'll build the server. You're going to see that the builds are really very, very similar, with just a couple little pieces being different. And so once we've built the one, we're most of the way to completing the other, by the way. So let's name the first part of this exercise 33_1, and I'm going to put client in here too, just to make sure that that's clear. With this, of course, we will need a public static void main to execute everything. So let's go ahead and add that right away, leaving the package declaration empty. All right, so here's the beginning part of our program. I'm going to go ahead and delete the built-in comment there. The next thing that we're going to do here is we're going to realize that we're building a GUI application. So let's do all the standard stuff we were used to in the past, which is extends application. We're going to do the control space to add the libraries for Javafx. And we're going to start adding all the pieces that it requires, including the launch directive here. And then up here, you see the program name is underlined. So we are going to go ahead and hover over here. There we go. Add the start method. I'm going to move my main method to the bottom, which is pretty typical for me. So you guys are used to this. And then the start method is going to get the stage and the scene and all that other stuff. So you can totally borrow that from a previous application, which is what I'm going to do. I'm just going to go to my chapter 16 here and grab one of these. Probably the latest one is probably one of the better ones to grab. And I'm just going to grab those things and put them in the start method. So we're ready to display things on the screen. Now, we should take a really quick look back at the book and see if there's a format or like a pane structure that would work well for what we're doing here. And the way that I see this is I see this as basically maybe a combination of two different shapes here. And so, we use the border pane structure a lot. And the reason we did that is because it really felt well for a lot of different things. Because remember how it would separate the screen into like top, bottom, center, left, and right. And you can put stuff into all those spaces or any space that you prefer. And so I'm going to use that as still my general structure as a border pane. But then I noticed that the top part with this layout that it has, that looks like a grid pane. So I'm going to use both a grid pane and a border pane inside of here. Let's start by building the border pane. And I'm going to do that here right above the stage and the scene. And just to keep it simple, I'll keep it named pane because, you know, hey, why not? And that way I don't have to retype that basically. Border pane, control space for the library. We'll name it pane, and then we'll instantiate with an empty constructor. Now, the way that I kind of look at this, I'm not going to need to use all areas of the border pane. I could probably just get away with using like the top and the bottom, or the top and the center is kind of what I'm thinking. And that's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to just use 2 areas of that border pane. So I may as well kind of predefine them right now. And so I'm going to say pane.set top, and then I'm going to need to put something in there, and that's going to be the grid pane that holds all of this. So I'm just going to say GP for grid pane. I know it's going to underline and yell at me, but I will create that in a little bit. Then I will also set the center, and with this one, we're going to think about what we're going to put in here. Well, first of all, this box, well, it looks like a text box. However, it's going to be a text box that looks like it has the capability to scroll. And they actually have a special type of pane for that called a scroll pane, into which I can then insert my text area. So like as my program keeps running and sending data back and forth, this can just keep scrolling and adding information. And so I'm going to insert here, instantiated on the fly, by the way, a new scroll pane. Yes, that needs a library, so bring it in, and be careful not to choose AWT here. Make sure it's Javafx. And then inside here will be whatever object I'm putting inside that area, which I've already predetermined in my head. Looks like a text area to me, so that's what I'm going to put in there. And I'm just going to use initials for TA, so I kind of remember it's text area. But now I need to create these things to put them in here. Let's start with the more mechanical piece of creating the grid pane first. And so above this border pane, I'm actually going to create the grid pane, which I'm going to call GP, and then say new grid pane. And yes, I realize I need the library. Let's control space and add it right away. And you can see it took care of it for me. Thank you. And now we have to put all the pieces into the grid pane. Not a bad time to just get that kind of done and out of the way since we're working on it. And so every time I'm going to add a component to this grid pane, I'm going to do a call it by name. So, and then I'm just going to say add. And what I'm going to do is kind of a combination of techniques that we've operated in the past. So one is I know that I have to put in labels for each one of those fields. And labels rarely change. In fact, they're usually informational, so it's okay to kind of instantiate them on the fly and not put them into a variable, which is what I'm going to do here 3 times over. So I'm going to do it exactly like this. I'm going to say new label, control space for the library. Make sure, once again, Javafx and not AWT. And inside the parens here, I'm going to name it. So the first one should say annual interest rate. And, you know, maybe a colon, a space. Or maybe not. You know, that's kind of very subjective right there. Now, the second and third arguments here are the column and row positions, and this is going to be top leftmost. So I'm going to put in 0, 0 for these. So topmost, leftmost cell in the grid pane. I'm going to repeat this. In fact, we're going to have three of these. So just a quick copy paste twice. And then here we're going to just very simply change the label and then change the column and row numbers to accommodate. Here we're going to say number of years, and we'll put this in the second row, which is row 1. And then here we can adjust this and say loan amount. Then this will go in row 3, which is indicated by a 2. Okay, so there are our labels. Additionally, we're going to have to add a few more items. So if you look back at the browser here and look at the application, we're going to need 3 text boxes and a button. And these, because they're objects that are going to be sending data from one place to another, it's good to set these as maybe global objects that we can interface with any part of our program real easily without worrying about it being inside the start method. And so I'm going to create those objects outside of the start method right up here. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to indent in, and I'm creating these all as privates because they are going to be private to this program. We don't want it polluting the other program because it will have its own that are private. And so we will begin by creating that big text area first. Let's get that out of the way. So that's just text area, control space for the library on that. And once again, Javafx. All right. And then once we have the text area, we already kind of predetermined we're going to call it TA, right? We did that below. And we're just going to instantiate a fresh one with no arguments sent to it. Close out the statement. Next thing we need is 3 text fields. And then we need to name each one of those. So let's, all of these will be privates. And let's create the first one here, and then the rest will be kind of a piece of cake because we can copy paste. We'll use we'll use prefix naming here. So I'm going to preface every text box with a name that indicates that it's a text field and what kind of information it's expected to hold. Makes it easier for others to interpret. And yes, I'm using a pretty verbose name here, but it's very clear as to what it is. It's a text field that holds the annual interest rate. And then we will instantiate over here on the other side. And it looks like we need that library too. So this time I'll hover and import it from Javafx. Once I've created that, that's going to be repeated 2 more times for the other 2 text fields that we have. And then we'll just simply alter the names. And the next one should be num of years. I think that's pretty clear. And then this one should change to loan amount. There we have most of our private data fields. We have one more to add, and that's the button. That may as well go up here too. That will also be private. We will once again need the library for that. And let's call this BT submits for our submit button. And then we will instantiate. Oops. And then the text we want is submit or whatever you want it to say. All right, so there's our structure is pretty much together, believe it or not. I'm noticing I had a couple of highlights here for pane, width, and height because these were borrowed from a different program. Looking at my old program, I had decided to make this basically 450 pixels. This is what I did last time, so whether or not this will work this time, who knows? And I went by 290. Those are the determinations I made for size. Probably a good idea to adjust this as well. And we'll say exercise 33.1 client. And if you want, at this point, you could launch this and see what it looks like. So maybe we should just go ahead and do that. Let's do a Control S to save and see if our interface is okay. And this is really kind of a, when it comes to doing, interfaces, it's always good to build the interface and then add your stuff, your logic stuff to it. And often those are 2 separate jobs in programming as well. And I'm noticing a couple of things. First of all, I see my labels, but I don't see my text fields and my button. And the reason for that is I forgot to put them in the border pane or the grid pane, excuse me. So I have to go back and fix that. So I'm glad I ran it because otherwise I'd be scratching my head later, like what happened? What we have to do is we have to come back here now to the grid pane and do a few more adds. So we're going to add here the field that we want. Notice how it's finding it up above. So we'll start with the annual interest rate. And then we will put that in the second column, which is a column index of 1. And then in, let's see, what position would that go into? Well, that would go into the first position in column 1, right? Yes, that's right. All right, so it would be the topmost row and first column, which is actually the second column. All right, so sometimes I have to talk myself through that just to get it straight. Now we're going to do a little bit of repeat once again. We're just going to change which fields are in and which column and index numbers. So just doing this to save typing, basically. So we're going to change this one to be num of years. This will go in the third, well, we'll still be in the first column. So the second number is the one that's going to change here. So this will become 1. Yeah, that makes sense. Finally, the last one that we have in this position is going to be the loan amount. And so this value will change to a 2. And then we also need to add the button. And if you look at that image, this is in the third column, but not the first row, the second row. So it should be a column 2, position 1, should be the index values. Let's paste that in again, and this time we're just going to change this to BT submit, and then I think we said third column, second position. It's very hard to say the number is different than what you're typing, by the way. All right, let's run this one more time and just make sure the interface looks okay. All right, much better. Looks pretty close to what we have. Yes, it could be prettier, but I'm not worried about the pretty right now. I'm worried about the working. All right, so now that we have those pieces in place, now we have to go back to our program and start to add in the pieces, excuse me, that make the magic happen over the network. And so we need to add a couple of things on the global level here that allow for basically our input and output streams of information to travel from one application to another. And they have special libraries for this, which I'm hoping you guys read about. The first one is, the main job of this application is to send stuff to another program. So we do need the data output stream. So we're going to say data output stream. And yes, that will require a special class. So we're going to control space that. And that comes right from the Java IO. And then we're going to name this, and I'm going to say OS2 server. All right, that's the first one. But now we're also expecting to receive information back from the other application after it's calculated. So we also need an input stream. So we're going to say data input stream, capital S. And then let's also name it here IS, input stream, if you're wondering, from the server. And that way, when I see this in the code, I know this is where the data is coming back from. This one also needs a library, so hover and grab it. All right, so those are the two communications tools that we need that are now added to our application. A little bit different than what we've seen before. But if you read this chapter, you would have seen this very, very clearly in all of those applications. All right, next, the other thing that we're going to do here is we're going to think about how this application is going to operate. All right, so we have this stuff that's going to pop up on our screen. And what we're going to expect the user to do who's sitting in front of this is to type in their information and hit the submit button. So now we need an event handler that's going to react to the submit button. We know how to do that too. That's not too hard. And so I'm going to put that below the stage in the scene. So I want kind of like everything to build on the screen. And then after everything's on the screen, then we can worry about the interactivity. So this is a great place to attach the event handler. So we're going to say BT submit, our submit button, and then we're going to trip the set on action default. And in this case, we're just going to pull in our Lambda event handler, which handles, remember, the default action for whatever that object does. And for a button, it's clicking the button. And what we're going to do here is we're going to send or trigger a method called calculate on server. So what's going to happen is you click the button, and then it's going to send it to the server to do the calculations, and we're just going to receive the message back. Now, we need to create this method, and that's one of the things that, hey, maybe we should do that right away. And here's one of those things where I type the name of a method I haven't created yet, and then I will allow the tool to create the method for me. And so I'm just hovering over it here in Eclipse. It was working just a second ago. Let's try that again. Hover, and then I'm going to create method calculate on server. All right, so you see that appear here below. Now we do need to make some tweaks to this. We can't just like let it fly the way it is. Is it okay for it to be private? And you know what? Absolutely, it can stay private, because whatever happens here is going to be between this program and the other program. No other program needs to interfere, so private is fine. Is this method going to necessarily return something? Well, it is. It's going to put stuff into the text box, or results, but it's not going to return anything to the program in terms of data. It's just putting stuff on the screen. So the second term here can be switched to void. So in other words, we're not returning anything to the program, and therefore we do not need a return statement. Once again, this method is just going to be putting stuff on the screen for us. All right, so now that we have those two pieces in place, now we will execute some code inside of here that's really going to basically do the mechanical work of sending the data, having it processed, receiving it back, putting it on the screen. Here's one issue with doing this, though. Whenever you're working with an external resource, whether it's a file or user input or a network connection or whatever, a database, you either need to put exception handling directly on the method that you're using. In other words, you have to like tell this to, for example, throw an exception, throw exception and you declare what type, and or you have a try catch statement on the inside that does it for you, that will keep the program from crashing if there's no other application running, for example, or it's not connecting to it, that type of thing, or if the wrong information is received, that whole scenario. So we'll begin then by creating a try catch here inside the method, and I'm just creating the structure for that first, and then we will add the rest of our stuff within. And this will start to scream at me, because really I need to have a set of parentheses following this catch. And then inside here, the kind of exception we're going to be dealing with is called an input-output exception. And so we have to name it as such and say IO exception, and then come up with some sort of a variable name to hold whatever error message we get. Now this is starting to squawk at me a little bit, and notice how it requires a separate class. So we need to bring in that IO class, so make sure that you do that in your code. And I'm still seeing, all right, so it's still flagging at me. So let's hover over it again. It says unreachable catch blocks. The exception is never thrown from the try. Okay, well, right. So we have no code in there is what it's telling us. So let's go ahead and now start adding some code here, and then we'll deal with the aftermath of what we have here. And, frankly, I mean, I guess we could put the error message in right off the bat if you want. And where are we going to put our error message? It's going to go into that text area. So I can just simply call the text area and say append text. And then you might have something like, maybe try to be funny, Captain, there is a problem. Something like goofy like that. And then if you want, you can also append whatever the error message is to the string. That's up to you. All right. Up here in this part of the program, now we're going to do a little bit of kind of interesting stuff. I'm going to be pasting in a bunch of statements here. And the reason I'm doing that is I'm trying to make this as efficient as possible, folks. And so what I'll do is I'll paste it in, and I'm also going to do you guys the favor here of also putting it in code share. And you guys are probably going to go, thank you, thank you, thank you. I hope.
Thank you.
Because if you mess up these statements, you're kind of screwing up a bunch of other stuff. I am going to clear my code share before you guys get in here. And I'm also going to change our language encoding from Python back over to Java. And let's get rid of this little add here. And so I'm going to paste these into code share one at a time and then paste them into Eclipse. So
Are you
the
able
first
to
statement.
share the code share link again?
Oh, yes. Thank you for reminding me. So the code share link is now in the chat. You want to follow it directly. And the first statement I'm pasting into code share, oops, I guess is a code share link. Let's try that again. Is this statement here.
Marked the code share link.
The code share link is in the chat window. All right. So the first thing that I'm pasting in is this little snippet of code that will start to do some of our work. And what we're going to do is we're going to pull in information from our form, and we're going to, kind of tracing down this whole little tree of what we're doing. And you know what? I'm going to see if I can close my side panel here. Just a little more space. There we go. So if you look at this statement, we're going to the field with the interest rate. We're getting the text, and then we're running the trim method. And remember, the trim method eliminates trailing and leading spaces, and in some cases punctuation too. Then that will be parsed as a double because we're assuming that they're entering in an interest rate as a number. And we'll have to talk about that a little bit too. I have to look at how loan processes it first. And then once it's a double, it's stored into a variable here. So the first thing is we're just getting stuff from our form. So that's the first statement. And then we're also going to grab I'll grab the next two statements as well to kind of keep the process going here efficiently. So back over to code share. Here are the next two statements that go in there. And this is to get the number of years and to get the loan amount added to our program. So once again, back over to Eclipse, and we'll add those right below these statements in the try block. Okay, so we're getting the annual interest rate, getting the number of years, and getting the loan amount. All of them are basically doing the same thing. I'm noticing here that I don't have a trim command here, and I wonder why I did that. I just assumed that somebody wouldn't errantly type in a space. I'm leaving it as is. There must have been a reason I left it like that, or maybe I was demonstrating something. All right, the next job that we have is now that we have the data, we have the ability to send it to the server. And what's kind of fun about this is it's going to be handled kind of automatically. And all we have to do is call upon the data objects here to get it going. However, what just dawned on me is like, okay, well, we have these data objects that allow us to stream out and in, but we don't have an actual connection to our server yet. Now, granted, the program's not there, but we have to assume that it is. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to just step away from this method here for a second and turn my attention back up to the start method, where I'm going to add another try catch block, this time to initiate the actual connection to our other program, which we didn't do. And you could write this as a separate method, by the way, but in this case, the amount of code is so small, I don't functionally see the purpose of it. So I'll begin with a try block. Once again, I'll do a catch with parens and then another set of curlies. Here inside the catch, I'm going to kind of follow the same technique I used last time. And so I'll just paste in the same stuff again. And you know what? The error message can be really similar as well. And you can really invent your own, folks. I'm just copying from what I did last time. So I said there's a problem and put in a carriage return. And oh, I see. I'm converting the exception to a string. I'm not sure why I did that there. You don't really need to do that because I'm concatenating to a string. But once again, I must have been demonstrating something at some point. All right, now let's move up to the try block here. And this is where we're going to initiate um, the connection to the server. And to do that, we need the special type of class called a socket class, which establishes a network socket for the communications. That does require a library, and that is in the net library. We're going to name this, and I'm going to call this connect to server, and then instantiate a new connection. Now I'm typing in here kind of an interesting little piece of information, because normally what we would put in this field is the IP address or the host name of the server we're connecting to that would receive the communication. But however, I'm going to be running this on my own machine, both server and client. So the server address is actually localhost, which means it's looping back to my own machine. You could, you could hypothetically, and we have done this in the classroom when we're live all together, have one student send the loan information to a different student's computer, have it calculate there, and then send back to the other computer. Kind of a little cumbersome to do in our environment now. The second parameter that I'm going to add here is going to be what we call our port address. And one of the challenges that we run into when we're sending stuff over a network is which port address do we send to, because there are so many. In fact, there's over 65,000 different ports on any network connection. So that's kind of like a television set, if you will, with 65,000 plus channels to choose from. Where you, yeah, it really is, where you can send your communication. Now, the internet stuff that we typically do, like when we surf the web, that travels over port 80, right? And really, we can choose any port we want as long as it's not already in use by something else. But I'm going to choose a port that I know is usually pretty safe. I'm going to choose port 8000, and you guys should probably do the same. There's very little chance that you're running a web server that's using that port. And if you are, choose a port address that's something different. Only you can know if you're running a web server on your machine. I'm just doing this because this is typically a pretty safe choice. All right, now that we have that piece in place, now we will use the two data stream objects that we created to instantiate fresh ones, right? So that we can get the connection going. And so this is the syntax for that. And what I'm going to do here with this whole try catch blocks, by the way, folks, is I'm going to add this over on code share too, so you guys don't have to type it. And this is going to go above the current code, and I'm going to separate it out. Here, I'll put in some dash lines here. So that don't take the dash line, but here's the code that you can put in your start method. All right. What I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the two missing lines and drop those into Eclipse right here. And you can see that we are now instantiating new data input streams inside of each one of our stream objects. And I know that's kind of weird to kind of wrap your head into, but every time we do this, we are pulling in a fresh data stream. And that's a kind of an intensive action.
I'm sorry, Ty, where did you drop that other code?
That's in the code share. It should be right at the top. So here's my browser window. So everything above this dash line, this is the try catch block that then goes into the bottom of the start method. The purpose of this is to establish the connection to the server and get the communications going in both directions. And so you can see the input stream is freshly instantiated. uses the socket connection that we have. It runs a method that grabs the input stream, another one that grabs the output stream, and then assigns it to a variable name so that we can just very simply interact with it based on that variable name. And this is a very, very common type of technique for doing socket communications. But without these pieces, the client cannot communicate, and it's really the stuff inside the try block. Without these pieces, the client cannot communicate with the server. All right, so now that we have that piece together, now we can do the communications piece that we didn't finish over here. So now I'm going to continue on with my code path here, and we're going to put in a series of statements that are going to take the three things that we just grabbed and now write it to the server and then flush it out of our buffer at the same time. And so I'm going to paste all of this once again into CodeShare all at once. So here I go back over to CodeShare and I'm pasting them all. And you can see right above each statement, it tells you what it's doing. So each statement is sending to the server the piece of information that it needs and then flushing the buffer. And so I will add that now to my method as well. Right? So we're writing the interest rate, writing the number of years, writing the loan amount, flushing, clearing the data out. The next step is to get the information back. So we sent it in, we assume it got processed because that's what it's going to be programmed to do. And now we need to read the information back so we can show it to our users. And that's going to take a couple of more statements to get that to happen, which I'm just about to paste once again into CodeShare. So here we go back to CodeShare. And I just realized I deleted it over here, sorry. So back to CodeShare. And now the next statements will be as follows. All right, so this is setting up variables to receive the information, and then we are reading back two pieces of information from the server in a specific order. So we are reading two doubles in sequence, and it's important, by the way, when we write our program that we send them off in the right order too. And so this is going to kind of predetermine the order in which we're going to proceed here. And so we're going to get the monthly payment from the server, and we're going to get the total payment from the server here. Then the last thing that's left is just a matter of doing screen output. And the screen output is not really that hard. Once again, this will go into the CodeShare for you folks. And oops. I see you guys are poised to copy. Okay, so here are my two output statements. And you can see basically all I'm doing is I'm putting text inside the text area that describes what's coming back. So I'm reading back the variables, and then I'm outputting my original information, and then also outputting a separate batch of information. So that's why there are two statements that indicate the information that came back from the server. So I will see it reiterate what I typed, and then I will see it grab the information from the server and display it on the screen. All right. Now, believe it or not, that's all we need to make the program run for the client. I still have to paste these statements in here. And now that we have all this stuff together, let's just kind of quickly just do a really quick review of the code. And I'm doing this more for the sake of the video. So those of you watching the video and you're looking at the entirety of the code, I'm just going to do this kind of in segments here. All right. And now we will come back. So if you think something's screwed up, we will come back and take a look at everybody's work to make sure you're okay. But this, in essence, is the client application. Now, if I try to run this, it probably will not connect because there's nothing to connect to. but we should wait, basically, is kind of the point here, until we have the server application created. So that's where we're going to go next. So let's get started on that. And after we get a good start on that, we'll take our break and come back and finish up. All right, so here is the start of the next piece here. I'm going to come back over to our project here, right click and create a new class file. I'm going to call this one exercise 33 _1, and you guessed it, server. And then this one will also have its public static void main, and we will click finish. Now, in order to save a bunch of work, we're going to do a bunch of different things. So first thing I'm going to do is something I normally don't do, is I'm going to import all of these libraries. Well, there's some of these that actually I don't need. In fact, here, let's just copy them and then we'll eliminate the ones we don't need as we go. But that way they're all handy. I don't have to worry about like adding any libraries as I go. The ones I know I'm absolutely not going to use are, well, you know, I shouldn't even say that. Text field is not going to be used. Buttons and labels won't be used. You know, so you could preemptively, if you want, you could come in here and just kind of comment these out. And so that's what I'm going to do with a little bit of this. I'm not going to have any text fields. I will have a text area. I will have a scroll pane. Boy, I'm not sure if it's a border pane, a grid pane, or whatever, but both or one of those might go. But I can be rest assured that pretty much everything else is going to be necessary. All right, so that's one big step. Control S to save, by the way. Let's put our little launch directive down here. That's pretty important. The other thing we're going to do here is we're going to say extends application. We're doing all that same stuff we normally do. Notice how that one doesn't, you know, flag me because it, you know, hey, it's already there. Then let's also go over to the client here and copy. What's a good portion of the stuff here, and I'm just trying to figure out like what's a smart copy, and I'm trying to be really strategic about this and thinking about it for just a second. And all right, so here's kind of my thinking. Where are we going to put this? Well, you know, if you look at the image, it's just one scroll pane. Do I need any other panes? And you know, my head is screaming right now. No, you don't. You don't need any other panes. You don't have to create a bunch of fancy structures here. And so I could just right here inside the scene declaration declare it. So let's do the standard copy the stage and the scene stuff and move it over. We need that start method too, though, don't we? Okay, let's hover and add the start method. Let's move our main method to the bottom. And then let's paste in stuff from the other program. And there it is, pasted in. So what I'm going to do for my output is I'm just going to change this and on the fly instantiate a scroll pane, since that's the only structure we really need. And size-wise, last time I did this, I did 400 by 290 is what I did. All right. I see that it's flagging primary stage because for whatever reason it didn't name it that as I was creating it. So I'm going to name it that manually just to make sure it sticks. And with the scroll pane, I do need to do the constructor. And I think what I'm going to do here is I'm going to do the same thing I did in the other program, which is feed in a text area. And I'm just going to call it the same darn thing, TA. That seems pretty smart. So if I'm going to do that, if I'm using a text area, let's create that text area. And I'm going to drop that up here at the top, make it global so we can interact with it from any part of the program without a problem. Let's change the name here to server. And that's a lot of what we need here, believe it or not. And the rest of it is really going to be handled through all the interactions. Let's go ahead and save our work And this is a great spot for a break, almost spot on an hour in. And we'll be back in 5 minutes, so about 6:33, folks. I'll see you then.
Can you scroll to your other file, like midway down for me during break? I'll tell you when
Sure.
to stop. Keep going. Oh, right there. Thank you. Oh, up a
Oops.
bit.
Oh, sorry. I was gonna zoom out a little.
Oh, it'll work. Up a bit still. Up more. Yeah, that's what I need. Thanks.
Okay. All right, folks. See you in a bit. All right, folks. We are back from break, and we're going to resume our work on our program here. And I've reached the point in the build of this application where we need to bring in basically a fresh concept, and this is a concept that actually kind of extends to um, some of the things that we have not learned yet, and I hope that we can get to them tonight. And I don't know how realistic that is, but we will try. And that is a concept called multi-threading. So in an ideal world, I would teach you that concept first, and then we would do this exercise. But because time is so short and the semester has been shortened by a week, I'm finding it more important to get this done first, and we can kind of use the multi-threading tools before we really truly understand what they do. Um, but the basic concept is this: multi-threading allows us to begin a process in a program and then begin another one while the other process is still executing. Um, and that can be done for a lot of different reasons. If you can imagine, a server that might do a calculation like this might get many requests, maybe even simultaneously or seemingly simultaneously, to process code. And and that can happen maybe even thousands of times a second. So how does a program handle that? Well, without multi-threading, it's pretty simple. The program, for however long it takes to execute, is unavailable for somebody else to request. And when somebody makes that request and it's busy, it'll get basically a busy signal or an exception and crash or send an exception message back to the other program. So when we implement multi-threading, what it allows us to do is to initiate a new task before the last task has been completed, and therefore, hypothetically handling a larger volume of transactions without, bringing the program to its knees, so to speak. And so we need to add components here to allow for that to happen. And the way that we do that is by using some special terminology, and in some cases some libraries here too. But here's the terminology that we will begin, and I want you guys to type this in with me here, and I will zoom in a little bit, and then actually, why don't I type this in code share, and then I'll bring it back over here. So what I'm about to type is going to get added to the bottom of the start method just below the stage and the scene, and that is the call to initiate a new thread, which is a way of basically describing a separate process. And since we're on the topic, let me actually do this really quick, because I normally do this when I talk about multi-threading, is I go into the task manager on Windows. And if you guys aren't familiar with this tool, this is available through a right click on your taskbar, or you can just go to the start menu and type task manager. And usually when it brings it up on screen, it will look condensed like this. It just shows which applications you're running. If you click the more details button, a much more robust interface is revealed, and you can go in here and look at all these different performance aspects and services of your system, and it gets pretty granular. I do want you to look at the performance tab though, and as you look at the CPU information, you'll notice that as we're using our computer, we're really running more than one program on our computer at a time. In fact, this says 217 processes or unique applications are currently running on my computer, of which those processes have 2,400 threads or individual kind of subtasks that are happening within them. And this is what we're going to be creating here, is basically a thread. So a piece of a program that kind of really runs another process, so to speak. Handles, if you're curious, are roughly equivalent to memory spaces. So how many spots in memory are being utilized? by all these threads and processes and programs. And I think this is fascinating information to look at, because if you think that there's that many things happening on your computer simultaneously, and then you get frustrated as to, hey, why isn't this fast? You might want to look here. It's kind of the point. But this is basically what we're going to be creating. So we're taking a program, we're kind of branching it. So the statement to do that goes like this. We will initiate a new thread, and then a set of parentheses followed by a semicolon. Then inside those parentheses, and I usually like to do it in that order so I don't get kind of messed up, we will trigger something to run. Now, remember how we do lambda expressions, where we say like E, and then we do this. And then we usually call a method. In this case, if you remember in the other program, we called connect to server. Here we're going to say connect to client with parentheses. Now we're going to change one thing in here, and what we're going to change is this. We're not going to be triggering the lambda expression or the default action for a thread. That's kind of irrelevant. You can't click on a thread or drag a thread or whatever. But we can react to it running, and the way that we just simply do that is we use a set of parentheses, meaning that whatever process or function or method or whatever we're sending here, this will initiate a new thread to communicate with the client. Now, in the tail end of this will operate, but it won't operate until we actually tell it to start doing it. And then once it starts doing it, it will continuously operate, waiting for clients to connect and doing all that work. But this is the statement, so you want to grab this statement, folks, and add it to your code. So I'm going to do that. I'm copying that, and that's going to be added right here below the stage and the scene, right inside the start method. All right, so this is a real critical piece here. Now it's recognizing the fact I don't have this method. Once again, we'll do the same thing we did last time. We're going to just hover and then click create the method, and it just drops it in. We'll make the same changes we did before. This will be void because we are not returning anything, so we can remove the return statement in the comment. And then the name is fine, and then inside here we will create a try catch block. And so let's just do that mechanical stuff immediately. The try catch block, of course, will have the same basic pieces we had before. And then a message. And what I did last time is this, and I did a kind of a combination of output to the screen and output to the console, and kind of like a different little output line. So instead of a system out print line, I did a system error print line. Isn't that cool? With the error message being placed in there, but then I'm also putting the error message in the console of the program, or server, if you will, so that somebody's operating that can see it as well. All right, next thing that we'll do is start to get all the code in this try block, which really does basically all the work for this application. There's a little bit of it here, and I will put this all in CodeShare, by the way, piece by piece. I'm going to give you two big pieces to start with, and I'm just trying to get them properly copied here, and we'll talk through them. So here comes the first one. So over to CodeShare. I am doing the dotted line thing here again. So here I'm going to post in this code, and go ahead and grab that and drop it into your IDE. And I will do the same. And that's going to go in the try block. And there's going to be a couple of libraries that are going to be needed here that are a little bit different than what we had in the other application. So this takes a little bit of explanation, because first of all, we're going to need a socket connection here, but the socket connection that we need from the server aspect is a little bit different and has its own class. And so we are going to have to add the class for server socket. So I'm going to just hover over that and then import that from the java.net libraries. Notice that on the right side here, as I'm instantiating the socket, I am using the same port number that I chose in the client application. All right. Let's move on to this next thing that also requires an import. And this one is from platform from the Javafx application class. Right. I'm also noticing another underline now from the date class, and basically this should come from the Java utility library, not the SQL libraries, although either one actually would work, honestly, but it's better to import it from the date class. What this does is it pulls the system time from the system. And so every time a transaction is going to be processed on this server, it will timestamp with a live system date. All right, so let's talk about what these mean. So first of all, I think I explained a little bit. This is a server socket. It has a slightly different set of tools than a regular socket, and that's required for the server side of things. And then here we see some more multi-threading in action. And we are setting up here, excuse me, the platform thing, which is an extension of the application class. And what this basically does is it's a piece that allows it to run the code through the thread. And you'll notice here another method that says run later. And once again, with what looks like a Lambda expression, sort of, but what it's really doing is taking any one of these individual threads that were launched and running it. They call it run later, but it just means that this is running separately from what was running before or later than what was already running. That's kind of the thinking here. And what we do every time that happens is it starts out by saying the server process. It'll tell you when the server started up, and then it runs that socket connection called another one now, a standard connection to connect to the client to accept incoming connection. So that's kind of like flipping the switch, saying, open for business or whatever, or hey, bring the traffic. And then finally, another message will run here that will append text to our text area and indicate when it connected to the client. So as these things are happening, so basically what it's doing is it's setting up the socket connection, and then it's giving us a message in the console. It's running it as a separate thread. And then it's establishing connection to the client or allowing incoming connections from the client, and then it will give us a message indicating that it succeeded. Beyond that, then we're also bringing in those input-output streams, but we're renaming them this time. So we have an input stream that's coming from the client, see the change in names, and then an output stream that's going to the client. So it's just kind of the reverse of what was happening on the other end. This code is basically the same, but it allows for that stream of data to travel. Now here's where the code will get a little bit more familiar, but we have to do this next part in a loop. And so what will happen is we will trigger the server to run, and then the server will sit here and run this loop always until we basically close the X in the corner and shut the program down. That will just sit there and wait for data to come in, to process the data, and then send back the information. All right, so let's build the loop. So it'll start here with a while statement. And what I'll do is I'll begin the structure of the while statement, and then I'll give you the code to paste inside of it in CodeShare. So start by building the while. Inside the while statement, the condition I'm going to check is I'm not going to check anything. I'm going to force this loop to run always. I'm just going to say while true. And so I'm not going to ever change the true. It's just going to always run. This is a way to run a loop on purpose all the time. All right. Now, the stuff that goes inside is the stuff that makes the magic happen. So we'll start in pieces. The first piece is getting information from the client. So what I'm going to do here is do this. I'm going to say inside the while server. All right, so the first statement is going to be this. We're going to get the information from the client. So we're going to read through the data stream and then feed each one of those separate things being sent to us into these variables. All right, so back over to Eclipse, and let's get that pasted in. Next, we have to do a calculation. And back over to CodeShare now. And now that we have the information, we can do the math. And this is the code we're going to use to do that. And I want you to notice that we're using a call to an external method here, and actually an external class file. So let's paste that in, and then we'll kind of work our way past this. So this piece here is indicating, this underline here is indicating that, hey, wait a second, you're calling upon a class that we do not have. And so what we should do here is add that loan file. So you should go to your core shell, grab from the unit folder loan.java, right? And here it is in plain text, and you can just literally, Control A, copy it, or whatever. Or the other approach is, and probably smarter. All right, not sure how I got there. Oops.
Just to save the link and then save it to the folder that you're working out of.
Correct. And I didn't do the and see, I'm in the wrong class. All right, sorry folks. Yeah, just I think right click save link as is a smart choice here. And then just put it into the same folder, where you're working. And so for me, I would just track this down. I would go to my Java 2. There's my spring semester. Which project are we working on here?
33.
33, thank you. And that'll just go right inside the source folder and save it. Now, when you go back to your Eclipse here, it's not a bad idea to maybe collapse this down and then re-expand it. And then if possible, you can always do a refresh if it's not showing up, and there it is. Now, as it recognizes that it's there, this highlight should eventually go away. And right now, I don't think that we've implemented it yet. I'm just trying to see here. Let's do a save and see if the highlight, okay, so it did go away. All right, so for me, I had to hit save for the underline to go away, but now you can see that we're pulling that in. All we need to know is that this is able to process this. You notice that this is using the second constructor approach where you send in all the data. And so when I send that stuff in there, it'll calculate, and then I can call upon it because now it's an object, and I can just say get monthly payment, does the math for me, get total payment, does the math for me, puts it in a couple of variables, and what comes next? The next part is basically putting it on the screen. But we also want to write it back to the client. So why don't we write it back to the client first? So here's the part that writes it back to the client. I'll go code share here. So that writes it back to the client. So I'm going to add that right after these statements. And then comes the piece where we are multi-threading. So there's a possibility that many processes can happen at the same time. So I want to be sure that when I'm doing my output, that I'm attributing it one process at a time to the screen instead of like mixing the outputs. It gets a little, this is kind of a whole separate little multi-threading thing, but I'm going to give you the entire code for the output here, folks, in the code share. So here's the output piece, and you want to grab all this code. And then paste that here. Now this, once again, uses some of the multi-threading features again, but the output approach is really identical, right? So you can see that it's just going to append the same information that we had going into the console of the other program is going to go into the console of this program. And then this couple of statements here is sending that information back to the other program so it also can put it on the screen. And believe it or not, I think that's all of our code, folks. And now it's time to actually give this a whirl and see if it even works. So first things first, let's go up to the top of this because there might be a couple of the libraries here that we didn't use. So it's probably a good idea to just remove them. So any of the ones that are commented out or any of the ones that are flagging with the little yellow box in Eclipse are safe to remove. No reason to import stuff you're not using. It just really slows your program down. All right, save both. Make sure there's no red marks anywhere. I'm checking here to make sure that I have no problems. And I will begin by launching the server first. So I'm going to go to the server tab. And in fact, if you want, you could even come right over here to the sidebar and right click on the program and then choose run. And let's get that running. So that should come up on the screen. Oh, I'm sorry, this is asking me to do a run configuration. Let's just hit the standard run button here, folks. All right. And now this is kind of interesting. You notice what my computer did on this? Because this is accessing the network. Now the Windows Firewall is saying, hey, do you want this to happen? And I'm going to say, yes, please do. In fact, I'm going to check both boxes because even if I was like at school, and I don't know if they would consider that public or private really, it would run there as well. But yeah, don't do this at Starbucks, right? Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and allow access. So the server is up and running. And now I'm going to go over to the client tab. And I'm also going to get that one running. And so there it is. And now I'm going to get the server back up on the screen. And I want to show you, come back to my server and what is happening. The moment I launch the client, the communication started and the server put up on the screen, server process started. So its socket came live and then the client connected and that socket became live. Now here comes the big test, folks. So let's put in an interest rate. So let's say we're looking at an interest rate of 3.75%. And I'm looking for a 30-year loan. And I'm going to buy a house at $200,000. And I hit submit. And voila. So I have successfully sent the information from this client to the server where it was read and processed. And then the result of it was put here. So it reiterated the information. It did the calculations and put them on the screen. And then it did the same, sending that same information back here and also putting it on the screen. And this is a very, bizarre kind of thing to do. And, it doesn't really feel that powerful when you're doing it on the same machine. But if you can imagine, we could tweak our code here in the background to change this to an IP address of somebody else's machine and the port number that's agreed upon on the other machine, and the two machines can talk. Normally in the classroom, we would do that. And unfortunately, and truly, it's actually possible if we all use VPN. But I don't see that's really worth the effort at this point, given how little time we have left. I think we should move on to the next exercise. And what I will do with this next exercise, by the way, is I will basically share all the code with you via code share, and we're going to kind of build it in super rapid fashion just to get it done. And then the main focus will just be whatever little issues we have. So before we move on to that, let me just do that really quick. Pause the recording. Who's having issues?